Melissa, are we live?
Yep, they're good to go.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. This is Katie Crystal, the chair of the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission. Welcome to our October 1st meeting. We are starting at 7 p.m. on the dot. Given the ongoing public health emergency, we will be conducting this meeting electronically. Please let it be known that the commission staff followed all of the procedures outlined in the legislation enabling virtual meetings, including giving notice to the public, to the commission, and to the staff. This meeting is simultaneously being broadcast to the public on YouTube. I believe we all have the hang of the WebEx system by now, 6 months in, but a couple of reminders. Please do mute your microphone when you're not speaking. That helps cut down on background noise. As a reminder as well, feel free to use that chat function for technical issues, but no public business may be conducted over the chat. Again, as we've done in recent months, I'm going to try to forego the raise your hand function for questions and just allow commissioners to jump in. If you could be patient with everyone else and diplomatic, we'll hopefully get to everyone in time. And if that isn't working, of course, we can go back to the raise your hand function. Hopefully with no dissent, I'm going to propose that we roll call votes to reduce our time and keep us moving more expeditiously. We're still going to use the roll call for actual votes, but we'll look for opportunities to consolidate those into a single block. You'll see that, for example, on our consent agenda. So unless there are objections, I'm going to create such a block opportunity for the commuter choice. So consolidate the voting for the 2 action items of the commuter choice agenda. That's twofold: accepting the annual report and approving the list of projects. I will pause before we get there in our meeting, and if anybody would like to separate those out to vote separately, please do, just let me know. And as always with motions, it helps me and it helps Rhonda Gilchrist, our secretary, if you could identify your name as well as whether you are making or seconding a motion. So one of our hopefully minimal roll call votes is in fact our roll call. So let me turn it over to Rhonda Gilchrist, our secretary, for our roll call.
Thank you. Please respond with here or present when you hear your name called. Chair Crystal.
Here.
Mr. Gary. Mr. Elkhorn.
Present.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Present.
Mr. Dave Ferranti. Mr. Eben. Ms. Filler-Korn.
Present.
Mr. Faust.
Present.
Ms. Garvey. Mr. Krizik.
Present.
Mr. McKay.
Present.
Mr. Meyer.
Present.
Ms. Palchik.
Present.
Mr. Reed.
Present.
Mr. Smedberg.
Present.
Mr. Snyder.
Here.
Mr. Sullivan.
Here.
Mr. Turner. Mr. Stork is alternate. We have quorum.
Thank you very much, Ms. Secretary. Could I invite as well, I believe that we have some staff with us. And so if you wouldn't mind letting us know who's on the call as well, that'd be great.
I'm so sorry, I didn't turn my page.
No problem.
Katie, I'm sorry, but I forgot to.
I'm so sorry.
I forgot to say I was present. This is Dan Stork. I'm sorry.
Oh, Dan, nice to see you. I'm so for letting us know.
Apologies.
And he will also be voting tonight since Mr. Walkinshaw is not here.
Great,
For
thank
the
you.
benefit of the listening public, the following staff are participating in the call. Director Kate Mattice, NVTC Commission Secretary Rhonda Gilchrist, Director of Finance and Administration Scott Kalkworth, Director of Programs and Policy Alan Fye, IT Manager Melissa Walker, WMATA Program Manager Andrew DeVetter, Program Analyst Zachary Smith, Commuter Choice Senior Program Manager Ben Owen, Commuter Choice Marketing and Outreach Manager Jay Watkins, Program Analyst Dina Gerber, NVTC Legislative Liaison Amy Perrin-Seibert, NVTC Legal Counsel Steve McIsaac, WMATA General Manager CEO Paul Wiedefeld, WMATA's Virginia Government Relations Officer Greg Potts, VRE Chief Executive Officer Rich Dalton, and VRE Chief Financial Officer Mark Schofield.
Thank you so much, Ms. Gilchrist. Okay, so launching in, I hope that everybody had the opportunity to review the agenda submitted or sent around rather by staff. We have a very busy agenda tonight, and in particular, we're very pleased to welcome General Manager of WMATA, Paul Wiedefield, to have a conversation with us this evening. We'll have a few action items, including our consent agenda, which is, of course, the electronic meeting resolution with which I know everyone is quite familiar, as well as authorization for notice of direct contributions to the jurisdictions. We have two items, as I noted, that we'll try to combine into one vote for commuter choice. First, the program's fiscal 20 annual report, as well as the approval of our condensed and perhaps limited funding round, our round 4 program of projects. We'll also have one VRE action, which is the preliminary fiscal 22 operating and capital budget to forward on to the jurisdictions. So a couple of personnel notes, as it were. The American Public Transportation Association is recognizing Sharon Bulova, our former colleague, with a Distinguished Service Award, which we are so excited to share with everyone. She's being honored in particular for her leadership in founding the Virginia Railway Express, and she'll be recognized at APTA's conference later this month. She was the longest serving member of NVTC, and we congratulate her on this well-deserved national award. I think we also all know that our colleague Matt Letourneau was severely injured several weeks ago, is still recovering from surgery, as well as other injuries sustained to his face, coaching a baseball game. So if you haven't already had the opportunity to send your best to Matt, please know that we're doing that on behalf of the commission as well, and certainly wishing him a speedy recovery from some pretty serious injuries. Finally, to conclude on some good news, our fellow commissioner, James Walkinshaw, is welcoming a son this week. We are so excited for him. He'll be taking a short break from NVTC activities, as well as I hope from others, to care for his family. So congratulations to James and family as well. So the rest of the meeting agenda is ahead of us on the screen, and we will launch in. So first, our consent agenda. Before we jump in on these two, Kate, could you let us know if we received any comments from the public this month, which is, of course, an important function of these meetings virtually, is that people can submit those comments.
Absolutely. Yes, Madam Chair. And in fact, we did receive 3 comments this evening, and they were all forwarded on to the commission a little bit earlier today. Just to summarize, we did have 2 comments from the public voicing concern with cuts to WMATA services as a result of the proposed WMATA budget. In addition, we did receive a comment from one of the comments related to the commuter choice program. Just of note, the public comment period on that program itself was finished a little bit earlier this month, but again, because this action is happening tonight, I did want to include them in here, and those were all forwarded to the commission. The commenter is demanding that the commission provide information to him regarding a number of items related to commuter choice round 4 selection. A number of those things in his comment were actually included in the public materials from last month's meeting, the PAC meeting, as well as this month's meeting. But he also did have data requests on details related to toll revenue collections, as well as the financial plan for the Long Bridge project. Those may be best responded to by entities other than NVTC. And finally, I did want to pass along a specific quote from that comment. Requests that NVTC must pass a resolution prohibiting the use of I-66 toll revenues for the Long Bridge until such time as Arlington County and Alexandria have committed to funding an appropriate share of the $3.4 billion capital costs from taxpayers in those jurisdictions. And again, all of those comments were sent verbatim to the commission members earlier today.
Thank you very much, Ms. Matthijs. And thank you as well for an effort to direct that commenter to where he can find the materials that answer some of his questions in last month's meeting materials and minutes, and this month's as well. Any discussion or further consideration of those comments by commissioners at this point in the evening? Okay, hearing none. We thank those as well who've weighed in with concerns about the WMATA budget cuts, which will certainly be a topic of conversation later on in our evening tonight, as well as, I know, a subject of a number of public hearings that will be hosted by the WMATA board and staff as well. Seeing no comments about the comments received, is there any other discussion about the consent agenda? And if not, could I have a motion to approve?
So moved. This is Delegate Reed.
Thank you very much, Delegate Reed. Is there a second?
Friesick.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's been moved and seconded. Unless there is further discussion. All right, I'm going to turn to Ms. Gilchrist for a roll call vote.
Chair Crystal,
Aye.
Mr. O'Gary. Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti.
Aye.
Mr. Eben. Ms. Filler Korn.
Aye.
Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krezak. Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchak.
Aye.
Mr. Reed.
Aye.
Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan.
Aye.
Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Stork.
Aye.
The motion passes. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gilchrist. Okay, moving forward in our agenda to the probably main event of our conversation this evening, which is a WMATA presentation and report. As noted earlier, we are very pleased to have General Manager Paul Wiedefield here to update the Commission on WMATA issues. Certainly the issue of the day is that both Metro Rail and Metro Bus operations and revenues in particular have been hit very hard by the pandemic. And so we really appreciate, Paul, you're joining us tonight at the Commission to talk to us about some of those challenges, as well as the implications for the Metro budget and service operations. As notable, of course, the Commission, our members are the principal funding partners for WMATA in Virginia. And so it really matters that we're able to have these conversations at our virtual table anyway. So we really appreciate you, Paul, for taking the time to speak to us. And I'll turn it over to you. I believe you have some slides to share.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting me. And as you know, these are extremely challenging times. So I think it's very, very important that we just have open communication about some of the issues we're dealing with, and we address them together. So what I wanted to do is just run through sort of our top 3 priorities and then get into each one of those issues. As I do that, I'm going to take any questions, obviously, at any time that you want. The next slide, please. The three priorities we haven't changed. You've heard me several years now come before you. It's safety, service, and financial stability. And clearly, safety couldn't be more important now given the pandemic. So I want to focus on that first, and then I'm going to talk about what's happening on the service level in terms of some of the ridership and some of the issues there, and then talk about the financial situation we find ourselves in. Next slide, please. We continue to take numerous actions related to COVID-19. We've activated, as you may recall, we activated our pandemic response plan back in January 29th in 2020. And it placed the highest priority on protecting our employees and our customers. Very important for our employees, particularly a lot of our employees in some of the most vulnerable portions of the region that have been impacted by the virus. As you can see, we've taken a number of safety precautions on many efforts, many different fronts, to address the virus, both in terms for individuals, on their stations and vehicles, and making operational changes. And here's just a few of those that we've done. Some of these I know that you've also done on some of the local systems as well, and other systems in the region have done as well. Next slide, please. One of the things we're hearing very clear from everyone we're talking to is they want the system to be cleaned, they want to be disinfected, they want to see it to feel more comfortable to use the system. So we've heard a lot from elected officials, from business community, and from our customers. In fact, a recent Greater Washington Partnership survey found that 47% of employers in the region were very concerned about their employees using public transit. And they particularly wanted to see what we're doing to keep the system clean. We will continue these measures into the foreseeable future, clearly until a vaccine and until their customers feel it's safe to come back. Next slide, please. Some of the things we are doing that you'll see if you use the system, we will actually have 1 million face coverings that we will have available for our customers. If they unfortunately forget to bring one, that we will have one there. We're putting in hand sanitizers into our systems, and we're about to launch a major customer service campaign, not only to encourage social distancing and following, masks and things of that sort, but also to basically reinforce that the system is still viable as a viable alternative for your transportation needs. One of the things, the next slide, please, sorry. One of the things that we recently we did, as you know, you've been very focused. The NVTC has been very focused on fair payment, and we're excited about the launch of the Smart Trip on Apple Wallet. We're the first in the North America to have this system in place. We received good response from our customers to date on this, in terms of the number of people that have already downloaded and are using it. And the board just recently approved a 6-month waiver on the $2 Smart Trip fee to sign up new people to use the system, to use the new app. So not only is it convenient, it's safe because customers don't have to interact with fare machines and can instead add value directly onto their phone. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, starting really just about now, you'll start to see this. We're starting our marketing, our communications campaign. I know this is very important to everyone here as well. We plan to launch it through basically until January is how we have this laid up. The hope is that we'll increase awareness about Metro services and the steps we're taking to ensure our customers and employees are safe. We hope to partner with you in anything that you want to do in terms of also ways to get the word out on the things that the Metro is doing for the safety of the customers. Next slide, please. We've also worked very closely with the business community. Greater Washington Board of Trade, Tyson's Partnership, Northern Virginia Chamber of Commerce, the Greater Washington Partnership are all examples of some of the groups that we've been working literally shoulder to shoulder on some of these issues. We've set up a return to work survey to help inform service information with input from the business stakeholders that we've been meeting with. And the Greater Washington Partnership developed their own survey about employer trends, including transit, and developed a transit tracker in partnership with Metro to help determine where crowding is on the system. So if someone's thinking about the system, they will know if there's a crowding issue. Next slide, please. Also, core to all what we've been doing on the safety front is our capital program. And the capital program, as you all recall, is focusing on safety and good repair. Because of its importance, the importance of PREA funding that is matched by local jurisdictions, as well as the historic dedicated funding legislation that was passed in 2018, we can address these critical projects. In Virginia, a great example is the platform project that we've been doing over the last 2 years. The 6 platforms south of the National Airport were reconstructed last summer, and the 4 more Virginia stations in the western part of the Orange Line were reconstructed this summer. We continue to work on the National Airport platform today. As you know, literally pieces of concrete were falling on the tracks. We had to get in and do that work. But it's one example of how the capital program supports our overall goal for safety. If I could, I'd like now to turn to ridership and service. Next slide, next, please. If you could, the next slide. This slide really, this tells us where, what we faced here. Prior to the impact of COVID-19 in March of 20, Metro ridership was doing very well actually. One-time performance continued to be on an upward trend, and the financial outlook was looking stable. COVID-19 obviously has dramatically impacted that, as you can see with the dramatic drop-off in ridership. And I'll talk further in a bit about the projections into the future, but you can see the scale of where we were to where we are today with that slide. The next slide, please. So as you know, in March, the ridership went down significantly. It was down around 90% on the rail system and about just over 70% on the bus system as a whole. In response, and working with local and state, federal partners, Metro adjusted its service plan to meet the demand in what we call the stabilization phase, when we first were dealing with the virus in the springtime. In that phase, we had 20-minute headways on rail, and we reduced hours on bus and rail and reduced bus service. We then shifted into what we call the managed reentry phase in August, and Metro has been able to provide increased levels of service for both rail and bus with that phase starting in August. And of course, the ultimate goal is to eventually get to a recovery stage in 2021, once the economy and the ridership rebounds as people, particularly as people accept the virus, accept the vaccine that is under development now. Let me now turn to financial stability and the financial situation. Next slide, please. So we've had to revise our financial outlook due to in effect, the slow recovery that's been literally occurring across the globe. Excuse me. Since the development of the approved 21 budget earlier this year, it's needed to make assumptions for ridership impacts and additional costs amid the extreme uncertainty of the virus, utilizing information and expectations we had available at the time. Since then, the outlook and subsequently the recovery plan has become less optimistic in 21, and the return to normal looks to be further off than we first had hoped. We have seen that the virus transmission rate has spiked in certain regions of the country and states, and states have reinstated stay-at-home and distancing policies. The expectation that the spread might be slowed in the summer months, unfortunately, did not come to pass. Given the continued spread, we are seeing businesses, schools, and government continue to telework, and virtual education programs continue past our original assumptions. This all leads to a prolonged ridership recovery, which we unfortunately lead us past fall and into the winter months, where we usually experience decline in riderships, which will now likely be lower than even we thought then. As a result, we've had to expand and continue to ramp up our cleaning as well and safety measures, again, to meet the current pressures that we're all under. Next slide, please. In addition just to the financial pressures and just the ridership, there's other things that we have to wrestle with, meaning the staff and the board. These include, obviously, maintaining the safety of our employees and the customers, but also protecting bus service for essential trips for workers and transit dependent, acting regionally to promote economic recovery and support the federal workforce, aligning service with ridership demand with room for recovery and social distancing, reducing adverse impacts for workforce as much as possible, and being intentional about equity. These are all key policy issues that the board is wrestling with as we think through revising the 21 budget and as we start to think about the 22 budget. Next slide, please. We're all very fortunate with the CARES Act funds that we did receive in early spring. A large portion of that went to Metro as well as to the local governments. But as you can see on this chart, those funds dry up in January. And that's where we have 6 months left then in our operating budget, and we have to do a number of actions to deal with that issue if there isn't another act by the federal government. Very similar to what we're seeing in industries, throughout the U.S. Aviation obviously is one where their money ran out today, in effect. Ours runs out in January on the burn rate that we're currently on. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit more about the 21 budget itself. With the likely ridership, that scenario that the board has adopted, the fiscal year 21 funding gap is approximately $212 million. $203 million of that is lost revenue, and $9 million of that is associated with increased expenses in those last 6 months. The management has identified nearly $43 million of additional internal savings through actions we will take. We also had identified 45 in the original 21 budget of actions we were going to take internally through a number of things to try to reduce the overall cost to the jurisdictions. The board recently took action, as you know, to put out a draft budget revisions for 21 and to remain a balanced budget, which is required by the compact. The next slide, if I could, talks about some of the actions that would support the revised budget. Some of these actions, in one form or another, may need to be taken to make sure we can finish this year's own budget without the need for additional jurisdictional federal funds. Obviously, if the federal funds come through, this becomes less of an issue. To what degree, we don't know, but we would obviously pull back on some of these things. Matching Metro Rail service with demand. We're implementing turnbacks, shortening service hours, and starting with the Silver Line in phase 2 in Q1 of fiscal year 22 instead of Q4 in 21. This results in net savings of approximately $92 million in fiscal year 21. On the bus side, we plan to maintain the August Metro bus service plan and resume fare collection, meaning opening the front doors in Q3. This will provide another $68 million in net savings. These measures would reduce the full-time equivalent, in effect, employee count by roughly 1,700 employees. Obviously, we'll do everything in our power to use vacancies. We're looking at things we can do to incentivize retirement and not backfill those positions, for instance. All that's being worked through now. But the scale of these cuts results in roughly 1,700 layoffs in terms of positions. Next slide, please. The other thing, so this is sort of the timeline for us to deal with the 21 budget. Again, we're 3 months into it. So we got approval from the board to do a public docket that outlines the details of the plan on September 18th. We will be conducting virtual public outreach like we're all doing right now. There will be approximately 3 months for the proposed changes to be debated. But just so you know, under our CBA, our collective bargaining agreement, if we are to do any layoffs, we need to give 60 days notice to do that. And we expect the service reductions to take effect sometime in mid-December. And again, if this fiscal cliff occurs and the CARES Act funds dries up in January. We've also started to do some thinking about the 22 budget. Again, it takes a lot of assumptions on where we all will be in terms of ridership and the impact on revenues that we'll have. But the board will start to address that we started it in October. That goes for the next several months. And as we learn more in terms of what's happening at the federal level, what's happening with the virus, we'll put more details to that. But the initial look ahead, we don't see this turning around very quickly in 22 either. And we will have to deal with some major financial issues, like I'm sure you are at the local level with some of your funding sources as well. The next slide, please. Again, we all need each other's help, right, to deal with these issues. So clearly, we're looking for the federal government, hopefully, to step up and provide some of the dollars that we need to keep the system going. But we can't lose sight of the value of this system to the economy of this region and the economic recovery of this region. So that's why it's important that we all work together to do what we can to provide the best service we can, given the financial pressures that we're all facing. So with that, I'd be glad to take any questions. And if you need more detailed information on the next slide, obviously you can go to our website and can go up the budget and get into much more detail there. But I'd be glad to take any questions or comments you have at this time.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation. Colleagues, I'm going to go ahead and try to just open the floor for folks to jump in. If you wouldn't mind identifying yourself, I think that would be helpful since many members of the commission are in their first year. And if we'll just do our best to sort of give each other a little bit of space to ask questions. So would anyone like to begin?
Chair Crystal, this is Delegate Reed. I have a question for Mr. Wiedefield, if that's okay.
Please do, yeah.
Mr. Wiedefield, on slide 23, you had identified that there would be about 1,700 potential layoffs. What percentage of the workforce is that?
That is, we have roughly 12,000 employees. I'll do the math real quick in my head, but it's a significant amount. I mean, it's a significant amount of employees. That's also, if you recall, several years ago, we actually reduced the workforce by about 800 when about 4 or 5 years ago when I came in to deal with some of the budget issues we were dealing with at that time. So it's down over 2,500 now. We will be down almost 2,500.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Delegate Reed.
Katie, this is John Faust from. Okay.
Hi, good evening. Please jump in.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Weaver, first of all, thank you for your presentation and thank you for the efforts you're making. I know how difficult it is. I represent the area that is going to be served by the phase 2 of the Silver Line. And I just want to put my marker down that your board has basically reduced service by maybe 20% across the Metro Rail system, but 100% on the phase 2 of the Silver Line. And I'm not convinced that I'm going to be able to do anything about that prior for this year, fiscal 2021. But I do know that I just heard you say, and I know this to be true, that fiscal 2022 is not going to be a whole lot better or a lot easier. But I want the Silver Line Phase 2 to be treated equally with other rail service. We've been 2 years, we should have had that service 2 years ago, and we still don't. And it can't be just put off indefinitely while we deal with this budget challenge. So that, I just needed to say it because I'm going to be making it a big issue going forward. And I hope you'll be able to accommodate all Metro Rail service and not just, not to the exclusion of the Silver Line Phase 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fasten. That is not our intention at all. The reason that was pushed back is really the project itself. Originally, we anticipated that the airport would be turning that project over to us in the December timeframe. They basically had out with some of the issues they're still working through. They've now pushed that back to later in the February-March timeframe. So rather than spend the dollars now and bring a lot of people and then have them sit, what we've done is we've pushed back a lot of the hiring so we can save some of those dollars. But we didn't do it as a cost-saving measure. It was done, the reality that the system is not ready to be open in spring of this, spring of 21. It so happens that we do save dollars because we're not bringing people and having them, they're not on board yet. So we pushed that roughly 3 months. So it has nothing to do with not wanting to get that service up as quick as we can. We want to do that, but it has to be ready. That project has to be ready.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to interject briefly to just ask if you're not speaking, if you could mute yourself. I think that will help with background noise. Other questions on the Silver Line? I know that's been a really key issue to really all of us in Northern Virginia, but especially our members in Fairfax and Loudoun. And so, while we're speaking of it, is there follow-up on that?
Katie, it's Jeff McKay.
Hi, Jeff.
Hello. First, on the Silver Line, I obviously agree with Supervisor Faust, and I think the main concern at this point, we understand the delays with the airport authority, and we know those are somewhat out of Metro's control. But it would be nice, the date, has slid many times. It would be nice to give some reassurance of, what the new date is and to really be able to ensure that we can open by Labor Day. I mean, obviously, the delay to February to March is, beyond our control. But when we decide to open, assuming that the airport's authority finishes there, when we decide to open, does become within our control. And so I'd like to get a little better idea of how concrete the new projected opening date is on the Silver Line. And then just one other quick comment, and I appreciate the presentation. I do want to congratulate Metro on its Apple Pay system. I remember being on a task force when I was on the WMATA board back in 2009 and 2010, where we were looking at ways to get Metro out of the banking business and save a whole lot of money, get out of contracts that were exclusive to one vendor with the payment system, get out of the back room having to do accounting, collecting cash and dealing with handling it, and get into a modern system that makes Metro a transit provider and not also secondarily a banking system. And so I guess my question is what are the future opportunities there? And are there, at least there were 10 years ago, I don't know if there still are there significant projected savings to transforming the system into a more modern payment system for fare? And so those are my two questions. Obviously, the Silver Line opening date is the most important and timely. But I would like to know what the other future phases are for the contactless fare system.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McKay. On the Silver Line, as you know, there's a series of issues that we've been working through with the Airports Authority. A number of those have been knocked down. One of them, as you know, the OIG was doing a review of the panels, and that's an issue that's been settled now. There's a few others that continue to be worked on, whether it's some of the turnout issues we had, whether it was the ballots at the yard, things of that sort, but they're all working through. Unfortunately, we did just find another issue that we've got to run to ground first, and this is this cross bond issue, which is basically the electric current speaking to our signal system correctly, is to put it in simple terms. And so we're waiting on some materials from the contractor, CRC, or the airport is. And once we get a handle on that, then we can, get a more firm date. But all this will be driven by when airport says, yes, this is done with their contractor, then they turn it to us, and then we basically test the entire system. So I want to get there as quick as possible, but I think there still are some open issues that the board is concerned with that we all should be concerned with, because the ones that are open are more of a safety nature. There'll be other issues with maintenance and things of that sort, and we'll deal with those. The ongoing maintenance issues, that's a different issue. But the core ones that would hold up the date would be purely safety. And so we've got to knock those down. And so we're working with the airport authority and with their contractor. We have our people out there to try to get that as quickly as we can, and we'll continue to do that. In terms of the fare system and the payment system, we have the agreement with Apple. We're working very closely right now with Google, and hopefully we'll get that. And the savings, what we'll see is over time, some of the things you just mentioned, getting us out of the money business, the banking business, where we literally have to collect cash out of those, large refrigerators that we all go up to and buy our smart card. Well, they start to go away. We don't need those, would be very few. I mean, we'll start to advertise people as they land at Reagan Airport or at Dulles that, hey, welcome to Virginia and Washington. Have you gotten get this app, and now you can use our transit system. We don't need all that hardware and all the manual labor that we're using just to collect money, fill machines, repair machines. All of that goes away. And it's as quick as we can get there. A lot of this on the technology side is driven by Apple and Google. I mean, they do it on their time. We've given them the materials to do it, and Apple picked up on it and has done it. And I'm hoping in the very near future we'll have Google, and we'll continue to chip away at that. And I think it's long term, it's tremendous savings for us and a much more convenient for our customers.
Thank you, Paul. I couldn't agree more. So I really appreciate that. And then lastly, no need for response. Obviously, we all know that the federal government has to step in to help Metro here. And so I really appreciate your acknowledgement of the pain that, a lot of us at the county level are experiencing and state level with our budgets. And I want you to know, I know as a commissioner, do everything we can to press this issue on Capitol Hill and with the Congress, because frankly, without a significant federal investment in transit systems across this country, the problems that Metro has are being experienced across the country, and they're going to need a federal financial fix. And so we're there with you. Anything we can do to help support Metro in that cause, make sure that we know that and we can engage.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Wiedefeld, this is Mike Turner. I'm the Ashburn supervisor out here at the end of the line in Ashburn. I've kind of assumed that the operational deficits that you have to address are different pots than the Silver Line Phase 2 completion, that those are different pots of money. But we're talking about fairly draconian cuts next year. If we're looking at another $400 million shortfall in next fiscal year, and theoretically, if it's linear, another 1,700 layoffs, you're looking at a 28-29% workforce layoff. But that's all operators, correct? That's all operations. Does that have any correlation or crossover when you're cutting that deeply? Is that eventually going to spill over into and have a parallel effect on the completion of the Silver Line? Or are they in fact really two completely separate pots of money?
The construction is totally separate, so that will not be impacted by this. The ongoing operations of the entire system is what's under stress. But so right now, that's until the airport finishes their work. It's not our issue, to be frank. It's not the WMATA issue yet. Ours will be operational once it's up and running and ongoing maintenance. But that is, again, I believe that's in Q1 where we'll start to take that on.
Great. Thank you very much.
So we called Matt DeFranti, Arlington County Board Member. I wondered if you could, you mentioned retirements as, I think Chairman McKay made the point about the impact on those who might lose their jobs, and that is serious for sure. You mentioned the retirement option and wondered if you could provide, it's early in the process, but if you could provide any sense of that 1,700, any initial projections on how retirements might help in that number, or any sense as we think about the workforce?
Sure. I believe I think I have this number off the top of my head. We have roughly about 900 employees that are retirement eligible. Right now, whether they choose to retire is a different issue. And then the other issue is some of those positions are, as you can imagine, key positions. So we'd have to backfill some of those. But those that aren't, where we would be cutting, then obviously that would save a job. So we are exploring that. We also have proposed furloughs as well. I can do that on the management side of the base, not the ones represented employees. Their only option is layoffs because of our contract. But on the management side, we can do furloughs. So we're looking at 5-day furloughs in the remaining 6 months, and obviously we'll look at that in 22. Very difficult, morale issue. Obviously, not getting any raises during furloughs, extremely tough for all of us. But we all have to, come to the table and to solve this. And so those are some of the things we're looking at.
Thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate it.
Madam Chair,
Please, Mr. Snyder.
I'm sorry.
Oh, please go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt anyone else if they had questions. Is it okay? All right. Thank you. Well, Paul, thank you. I have ridden the rail system several times during the course of the pandemic, and I want to compliment you and the employees for continuing to operate and to provide first-class service under very difficult conditions. So let me first thank you, the board, and all the employees for the work that you've done. Secondly, I want to compliment you on the end result of the East Falls Church work and the work on those other stations. Frankly, the experience is so much better, and it's so more usable and friendly than those stations were before. So thank you again for that great work. Moving on to the combined challenges that we all face. Do you have a sense that some of these commuter trips are in fact not going to come back as a result of long-term changes the private and maybe even the public sector is making? And how are you going to adjust the rail service over the long term, assuming that even with a recovery from the pandemic, a number of employers have made and employees have made the decision that remote work is what they're going to do, and that remote work seems to be having a particularly negative impact on transit. So what's your thought about that? In addition, with travel patterns changing and people working from home, it seems to argue for more focus on the bus system, how we can make it more nimble, flexible, able to change routes more rapidly. So while we focus on the rail system mostly tonight, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what your plans are for Metrobus, perhaps to, because of its flexibility, the ability to change to different volumes and different paths that people are taking when many of them work perhaps for the foreseeable future remotely. And then finally, there was some publicity about the rail communications coordination center, and I wondered if you could just reassure us that that center is running well and there's no reason for concern. So, thank you.
Thank you, David. Let me hit on that one first. That's the Rail Operations Control Center. Yeah, there was an audit by the MSC. It was not acceptable, obviously, to us. Some of the issues that were raised. I have moved that control center as a direct report to me. Now we have brought in an entire team to do that. We literally are conducting an international search for a new director of that operation. But I can assure you, if the system is not safe, I would not run it. So it is safe, but we've got to tighten it up. And there really were some cultural issues there that were just very disheartening to hear. And that's what we are focusing on. Obviously, there's some technical things that we are doing that we have to do for different corrective actions that we give to the MSC. But the larger issue for me is getting that culture to where it should be. And that's what we're focusing on. So we'll continue to do that. In terms of the new normal, what that new normal looks like, I think we're all trying to understand what that may mean, particularly the long-term, systemic changes that may or may not occur. The only thing that I think, though, I try to keep a little bit of not trying to guess what that will be in 2 years. And the reason I do that, as you may know, I was the head of BWI Airport. I came to that airport shortly after 9/11. We were the first. I literally started the week that we set up TSA, the first TSA checkpoint in the country. At that time, if you would have read papers, aviation would never come back to the degree it was. We had SARS, if you recall, we had terrorism, and the price of fuel was about $120 a barrel. And in roughly 9 months, I was negotiating with Southwest to build a 26-gate terminal, right? So I know we're all, right now in the middle of this, and but I think we have to give it some time to see how these things evolve. My belief is that transit has and will continue to play a major role in this region for lots of reasons. But obviously some of it's traffic congestion, but it's where people want to live. It's how they want to interact. It supports the whole community. So I'm a strong believer that will come back. How quickly, I'm not sure, but that is what people have chosen to do. That's what the development community is based on, right? Particularly in a lot of our areas. And I do see that coming back. And then in terms of the bus, you're right. We, as you may recall, there was a bus transformation effort that we were part of the last 18 months, almost 2 years ago. Now it took 18 months to do. We are working now with the board to create new bus standards, which deals with some of the very issues that you're talking about. Is a much more flexible system that reflects different types of transit needs, different types of communities. How do you serve them? What's a productive way to do that to meet those needs? To be frank, our standards are almost 20 years old. We haven't kept up with the industry. We haven't kept up with the region. So that's why we're putting this before the board. And we believe as we start to rethink the entire bus network, both with the standards and the environment that we're in, I think we will get a much better system out of that.
Thank you.
If there aren't any other questions imminent, I'd love to ask one of my own, which is, I'm certainly heartened to hear that optimism formed by your experience in a very different medium of transit. I wonder if you could give us any insight. We think about those efforts on Capitol Hill that have certainly stalled out in the Senate, but are, I think as Jeff was putting, practically existential for WMATA's future. It occurs to me that we are not the only rail system for whom this is true. And I wondered if you'd be able to give us any insight into those efforts at Capitol Hill with your other counterparts running large rail entities, and sort of what the future holds and therefore what that could mean for the efforts at the federal level.
In fact, I'm very active in APTA, and we work very closely, particularly with the other major properties, meaning Chicago's and New York, San Francisco's of the world. And so we have a concerted effort, in how we approach this from a legislative. We have our own, Regina Sullivan and her team does a great job locally. We're very fortunate. We have a delegation that doesn't need a lot of convincing. You know, they're leading the charge, but it's working on some of these other areas. And one of the things that we're focusing on, the transit industry is focusing on, is educating that transit. Even though we have things here, the reality, buses are made in Alabama, right? Rail cars are made in Nebraska. Right, so it's not just those core areas. It's not just the New Yorks, the DCs, and the Chicago's of the world, but transit impacts local economies all over this nation, and that's what we want to reinforce to them. Much less the actual local services in some of these communities, but we are a huge part of the economy. You know, with literally hundreds of thousands of workers that produce and a manufacturing base that supports that. And that's what we've been really trying to sell, you know, in our efforts. And obviously, we're all selling for our own individual properties. But more importantly, is to say, no, this is a national issue similar to aviation. You know, to us, it's the exact same thing. It's probably more important is a lot of what we provide, meaning transit, is for the basics of what people need to live. Right, whether it's essential worker getting to health or whatever those issues are, that's what we do. Aviation, you know, generally is a choice mode, right? But transit, in a lot of cases, isn't. It's a core, you know, function of government, and so we're also driving that home as well.
Thank you. That's helpful. Perhaps those arguments too about jobs back in the states among the constituents of some of the senators who've been less interested in a package will resonate. Other questions? Okay.
Madam Chair.
Please.
This is Elizabeth Parker from Alexandria. I have two questions. First, I know through the 3% working group, there were discussions about collaborating better with jurisdictions during the budget process. And I was wondering if WMATA has thought about process improvements to share more data earlier on in the budget process with jurisdictions in the magnitude of the cuts that we're looking at.
I'm sorry, I was having difficulty hearing the question.
Could we encourage everybody to mute themselves as well who aren't speaking? That might help.
I'll try that again. Okay, I think that's
okay. Sorry, much better.
Still sounds like there's a lot of feedback. I was wondering if WMATA has given thought about process improvements to share more data earlier on in the budget process with jurisdictions, especially given the magnitude of cuts that we're looking at.
Yeah, as you can imagine, you know, this is changing almost by the hour. So yes, we can share as much as, you know, as much as we have. A lot of this was some discussions we had with the board over the summer. Remember, the board did not meet during August. And so we were working through, as we were all watching what was happening across the nation, or across the globe with the pandemic. When we had left in July, you know, things were starting, you know, in June, we're starting to open up. It would seem, you know, things were starting pointing in that direction. And then July turned, and then August turned in a different direction very quickly. So yes, we can provide as much data as we can, and as quickly as we can, but we also have to do a lot of work and a lot of assumptions to do that. So it does take some time as well, but I commit to do more.
Thank you. And then my second question has to do with the earlier conversation about contactless payment. And I think that technology is very exciting, but I also want to make sure that it's not going to become more difficult or more expensive for individuals without smartphones or credit cards to access the system. I know there had been a budget proposal last year to put a cash or a surcharge on those trying to pay with cash on buses. And I will flag at the same time, I know that if you try to add money to your Smart Trip card online, and then at least if you use it on a bus, I'm not sure about Metro, but it's not automatic. And it can take up to a day to sometimes show up if you're trying to use your Smart Trip on a bus. And I think that's something that can be, if there's a better technology to expedite that process.
Right. Well, I mean, the technology is the one that we've come out with. It does it instantly. You don't have to, there's no lag time. We have, the research that we've done is, I believe it's roughly 95% of our users, both bus and rail, have access to a smartphone. So now we need to focus on those that don't, like you're saying, and what can we do to make that easier for them to use the system? So that the issue with the additional costs, if you were using cash, was trying to deal with some of these issues. That is less of an issue now, since basically we'll be saving money without not having to move a lot of cash. It's a lot of it is because we have this whole infrastructure just to deal with moving cash. Well, that's going to go way down because people are just going to use their smartphone. So that will be less of an issue. There were some issues in terms of speed of bus, though. That was also one of the rationales for that at the time, that it slows down the movement of bus if people are putting in money. But anyway, so we will continue to focus on that and make sure that we're doing everything we can to make it as easy for those that don't have smartphones to use cash when they use the system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? I will note, just to piggyback on Elizabeth's question, I think I really appreciate that commitment to greater budget transparency. Of course, this is a really evolving time. I will note, I think that question, in fact, that desire dates back to the creation even of the fiscal 21 budget. We are all a little bit at the mercy, right, of those numbers, especially in Virginia, which, as you well know, it is us as the localities who are paying in. And so when there are changes to the locality contributions in a budget spreadsheet at the 11th hour, it has major impacts for us. So we know that you as general manager have been supportive of that, and we hope that will sort of trickle down to those budget staff in particular during the hopefully someday back to normal budget process. Okay. Any other inquiries? All right. Especially, I know our delegates have to leave for an 8 p.m. I think caucus conference. So if you all have any questions, we can be sure to get those in. All right. Going once, going twice. All right. Mr. Wheatfield, thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like to stay. Oh, Paul, Cusick, did you have a question before we wrap up?
It's just I'm curious about the tourism. How much of your budget is contingent on robust tourism and international and around the country? And also and you mentioned having advertising at the airports and I'm wondering about international tourism, and they're going to have to get the app and everything else like that. Is that going to be an issue, or do you? I know when I go to Europe, and like if you go to London, you can use the Oyster card, and that's pretty easy. And I don't know if you've gone to something like this by now, but it can be a little bit difficult, I guess, for some tourists. But I'm more worried about how the drop in tourism is hurting the system. Is that a big driver of losses?
It is a substantial driver, particularly during the summer and major events. It is, and so we took part of our big drop is tourism. It's interesting though, with some of the marches and things that have come in, that relatively small. We had one in August, but actually our numbers went up. So people from out of state that came in did actually use the system. But in terms of people coming to Washington to do, what families would do during the summer and what schools would do, that's all has dried up. So that is part of the problem that we're dealing with. But again, that is going to come back, right? I mean, this region is a draw and always will be a draw for tourists. And when they come, they tend to use us. And we want to make it as seamless for them to get on the system. They don't have to figure out our whole network. They don't have to figure out our machines. Literally, they get a notice, say, here, add this app to your phone, and you can get on and go. So that's why we're focusing on that.
Great. Thank you so much. Okay, so thank you again, Paul, for joining us. We really appreciate your time and answering these questions. You're welcome to stay, at least for the rest of our WMATA report, if it works for your schedule. And if not, again, we truly appreciate you making time, especially and because there is so much change afoot with the impacts of the coronavirus pandemic. So thank you again.
Thank you so much.
All right. So we actually do now have a report of our WMATA board members, although it is board member singular today, again, because we are wishing Matt Letourneau a very speedy recovery, but we are fortunate to have another WMATA Paul with us today. Mr. Smedberg, did you have any additional comments to to add on to the conversation we've just had?
Yeah, Madam Chair, just let me very briefly mention a few things. And before I start, Matt sends along a hello to everyone. So as David highlighted earlier, the WMATA did complete its summer 2020 platform improvement project. So all the remaining stations west of Ballston are now open for service. And if you've seen one of the new stations, they are much, much improved. October 14th is the date of the public hearing on the proposed changes to the budget. And the public comment period is open. You can visit the website to submit any, submit any comments you have individually or for your jurisdiction. One thing I did want to highlight a little bit with the budget, we're making these changes for the remainder of fiscal year 21, but then there will be another budget presented later this year, November timeframe, for fiscal year 22. So any, deficit that we have to deal with there, and, the projections right now are in the range of, 450 to 470, that would be in addition to the 215 or 212 that we're looking at now. So, pretty dramatic, deficit numbers there we're having to deal with. Paul mentioned the ROC. The board is following that very closely. Did also want to mention the Transit Police Chief, Pavlik, gave us a update on all his engagement efforts with the community. And then we also announced the newly created Metropolitan Transit Police Department Investigation Review Panel. They will meet quarterly. We do have a representative. Matt and I interviewed all the narrowed down pool of applicants, and our representing Virginia is Don Knuckles. Don comes to us with a lot of experience, military and private industry as an attorney. And so I think he'll represent us very well. Service guidelines for Metro Bus will be updated. This is the first time in 20 years, and I know jurisdictional staff is going to be working closely on that, and NVTC will be, coordinating those efforts for us or for the commission. And that's it. A lot of other things, but that's it for now, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Paul.
All right. Yeah.
I'm sure we've exhausted our questions with having the general manager here, but questions for Paul.
It's Walter Alcorn. Paul, I believe one thing, the budget public hearing, I believe it's the 13th of October for anybody watching.
Oh, is it the 13th? Oh, I thought it was the 14th. Sorry.
Yeah, my understanding is the 13th. That's okay, but I just wanted to make sure.
It is the 13th. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no problem.
14th. You're right. 13th.
Yep. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for saying as much, Walter, actually, because that gives us a chance to say our thanks to you. As the rest of the commission knows, you're our alternate to Mr. Letourneau and have been capably stepping up to the task of a number of WMATA meetings. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Glad to pinch hit if we can continue the baseball analogy. Matt, would appreciate it.
Hopefully not too soon.
Thanks.
All right. Okay, so moving on, and of course, if WMATA questions occur to anyone else, we are not yet moving off the topic, which is our penultimate item, sub-item to the WMATA report, is an update on the 3% cap working group, which is to say that we have come to a close. I don't think I need to offer too much more background because we've been able to talk about this at most meetings this year. But as you'll remember, the General Assembly tasked the Commission with convening a working group on the usefulness of the 3% cap. And that cap is on the growth in Virginia's operating subsidy. The General Assembly as well was interested in whether any additional items ought to be excluded. So thank you to the faithful work of your jurisdictional staff as well as our private sector representatives. We have come to a conclusion. I hope you had an opportunity to review the report that was in your meeting packet. And I'm also going to turn it over to Zach Smith, who has been doing terrific work conducting the analysis and supporting the group, and we'll be able to provide an overview of the report before us. So Zach, over to you.
All right, thank you, Chair Crystal. I'm really happy to present the working group's findings on the 3% cap and the report to the General Assembly. So the General Assembly tasked the working group to examine two things, the usefulness of Virginia's 3% cap legislation, as well as if any additional items should be excluded from the cap. And in writing the report to the General Assembly, the working group used those two questions to define the scope of the report and what data we should review. And so during our meetings, the working group examined the historical operating subsidies just to better understand what drove those fluctuations in those past subsidy increases. And so what we found is that the Metro Rail operating subsidies, whether it be service increases, fare box recovery rates, or ridership, had the largest impact on the total amount Virginia was paying an operating subsidy from FY 2011 to FY 2018. And so in reporting our findings, the working group acknowledged that the cap legislation is new and that it has only been in place for 2 budget cycles, but it does appear to provide some budget predictability and allow WMATA to examine their spending. And notably, because there are legislative exclusions that allow the subsidy to grow beyond that 3%, those legislative exclusions do impact budget predictability. And so ultimately, our recommendations are to the General Assembly that no changes be made to the existing 3% cap legislation, no additional exclusions to the cap be considered at this time, no legislative changes be considered before the cap has been in place for 5 WMATA budget cycles, and that NVTC continue to evaluate the impact of Virginia's 3% cap legislation. And of course, the working group reviewed a lot of information on the cap and data that went beyond the General Assembly's directive to determine whether the cap is useful and whether additional items should be excluded. So the working group recommended that NVTC staff continue to examine the cap and provide an additional companion report on the cap to the Commission at a later date. And this additional report, when it comes to the Commission, will provide more details on the impact of the cap on the jurisdiction, a look at the unintended consequences from WMATA's implementation of the cap, and any possible modifications or alternatives to the cap. And the working group felt that this additional report was necessary because some of our feedback and our discussions were about things that were generally outside of the General Assembly's purview. And so for next steps, NVTC staff will work with the chairs of the WMATA committee and the Commission on when to present this companion report. And so Chair Crystal, I'll turn it back over to you for questions.
Thank you so much, Zach, and thanks again for your terrific work preparing the details and the analysis for everyone's consideration. So, colleagues, this is our opportunity to review the report. If there are amendments from commissioners, to do so. From here, it will move on to the General Assembly. So this is a good opportunity for feedback, for questions or for concerns to be raised.
Madam Chair, Dave Snyder, just to support the thank you for all the work and all those involved and to support your recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Just adding a thank you, Madam Chair, and also to Zach for the great work. I guess I was most struck by what was not said in the report, which seems so wise to be thoughtful about being succinct so that we are in the best position going forward. Thanks to both.
Thank you. Great. Well, I can certainly echo those thanks to Zach, who's been just a terrific analyst, writer, and facilitator for the group. All right. So unless there are any objections, we look forward to sending this report on to the General Assembly, and I certainly look forward to further analysis, which will be coming forward at the beginning of next year for us, the Commission, in terms of things to continue tracking and conversations we might continue have via our WMATA board members and then directly with WMATA regarding the application of that cap going forward. Okay, so our final WMATA item is, of course, the work of our WMATA committee. So I'm going to turn it to the WMATA Committee Chairman, Kenneth Aguirre, to see if there are any updates from the committee for the Commission.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know about updates because basically everything that was talked about in the meeting today is what we covered, which was, the 3% working group as well as the budget impacts for WMATA. Just like to thank General Manager Wiedefield again for coming before us tonight. I think it's helpful to have the dialogue with all the commissioners. The only thing I'll add is that our next WMATA committee meeting will be October 29th. Of course, open to everyone. It'll be at 6 p.m. and we will be reviewing a draft of the annual report of the performance and condition of WMATA. And that is it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And you're right, we did scoop you, so sorry about that. Thanks for the great work. Okay, so unless there is any other comments to be made, questions to be asked about WMATA, we are actually going to move on to our next major agenda item.
Kate,
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Yes, please,
can I ask a question. Is that now the 3% issue? Is that not going to be revisited anytime? Like, is it, because it seems to me it should be looked at almost annually.
That's a great question. Yeah, so to clarify, the recommendation to you all at the General Assembly is that we think it should be about 5 budget cycles, so about 5 years. We're a couple years in already, to just see how this plays out. There's been a lot of instability and, of course, a lot of growth in the exceptions, such as the Silver Line. But the committee is, or the working group is actually recommending that the commission continue to study this issue and flagged a few things in particular. For example, the ways that the exceptions are playing out and the sort of interpretation, especially of the exceptions introduced this past session. And so the commission is very much, the task force is very much recommending the commission continue to study this and a couple of issues in particular. And then the recommendation is that after maybe about 5 budget cycles, it could be an opportunity to revisit the cap altogether legislatively.
Thank you. One thing I noticed down in Richmond is that sometimes we, it doesn't matter what's being decided up here. We do our own thing, but I will endeavor to keep us all on the straight and narrow and follow what you've all come up with, because I think it is a good idea.
Thank you. We're lucky to have your allyship in that regard, and you can tell your colleagues who are concerned that we are certainly not letting it lay and taking a close analysis as the commission as well.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair?
Please.
This is Kate. Do you mind going back and doing the minutes?
To the minutes? I do not.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just about to say thank you to Kate for keeping me on the straight and narrow. I failed to introduce the minutes of our September meeting for approval. That was earlier on our agenda. And so I believe, Kate, we need to take a roll call vote for that, right? Okay, great. So we need a motion to approve the minutes of our September 2020 meeting.
So moved.
Oh, multiple motions.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to give that to Mr. Krizek, and then I think, can we say a second for Ms. Bennett Parker? Was that right?
Someone else on me that I was going to. I'm happy to.
Thank you so much. All right, so that's been moved and seconded. Let me turn it back to our secretary, Rhonda Gilchrist, to call the roll on the.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Dave Ferrenti.
Aye.
Mr. Evan. Ms. Spiller-Korn. Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizek.
Aye.
Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Palchak.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Turner.
Aye.
And Mr. Stork.
Aye.
The motion passes. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thanks so much, Ms. Gilchrist. Okay, with that done, we can now move into item 5 on our agenda, the Commuter Choice Program. Just as a reminder, I'm going to recommend that we have a block vote for the 2 actions, which again are the acceptance of our fiscal 20 report and the recommendations for the awards in fiscal 21. So be thinking about whether you'd like to vote on those separately. But I'm going to begin with a presentation from our Program Advisory Committee Chairman, David Snyder. So Mr. Snyder, over to you to summarize the PAC's analysis and thinking on these items.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. So we heard from WMATA about the impacts of the pandemic and the responses to the pandemic, and this program is also dramatically affected by the pandemic and the response to the pandemic. So there's just simply a lot less money to deal with here in terms of the toll revenues and the money to support various projects. But a lot of work went into analyzing those projects and scoring those projects. So let me turn it over to Kate to go into more detail about what we finally have come up with. And I want to thank all the members of the committee who worked through this along with staff to try to present to you a set of proposals that does our best to maintain current projects, funds only those projects which we know we have funding for, but also preserving and using the list and the technical analysis of other projects that will hopefully be funded when more funds become available. So let me turn it over to Kate Mattice for a more detailed look at all of this.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. And indeed, and so well, the journey, we're going to take a little bit of a step and look back because we've actually had an incredibly successful program. And so first of all, Jay Watkins, who's our communications manager, is going to give a little pictorial overview of the commuter choice program to date and the successes that we've had. We do actually, this is our first opportunity to submit a 5-year look back of performance in the program. So Jay's going to start off first, and then Ben's going to dive into the program that is being presented for your consideration right now. And Ben Owen will be covering that. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jay. She's just going to give you a bit of preview, and again, then we head over to Ben. So Jay.
Hi, everyone. We are happy tonight to present this year's annual report for the Commuter Choice Program and request authorization to send it to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. This is our first report, like Kate said, that will present a performance look back since the program's inception in 2017. This was definitely noted in the Memorandum of Agreement between NVTC and the Commonwealth of Virginia. We're also introducing for the first time both a printed report and a companion website. The website will feature all of the printed versions information, as well as include descriptions, status updates, and details for each of the approved projects funded under both the I-66 and the I-395 corridor programs. This report includes analysis through June 30th, 2020, and includes data that was gathered after the public health emergency and the safer at home orders. Next slide, please. So after 5 years of programming, we were able to dig deep into the data and figure out the things that are really working well within the program and some of the areas where we need to make adjustments as we move forward. One of the big things is we will be advocating for a more diverse set of projects. Almost 90% of the funding to date has been for new and enhanced bus service, and we've generally been successful. But we want to emphasize different types of projects, especially since COVID-19 may dampen the demand for this kind of continued expansion. We also want to ensure project benefits are readily measurable, particularly when it comes to TDM. And we want to encourage applicants to coordinate projects with other stakeholders in the region. As you all know, we're so very interconnected, and it's just essential to communicate with one another and coordinate our transportation efforts. Next slide, please. We had useful data for transit services and strategies to improve non-motorized access to transit stops and stations, so access to transit. So we focused on those kinds of projects for this year. Overall, these types of projects are doing very well, especially before our public health emergency. On the I-66 corridor, 69% of the projects met or exceeded their targets. And on the 395-95 corridor, 75% have met or exceeded their targets. So we are doing exactly what we are aiming to do. Ben has led our technical team, and we'll speak a little later, in developing a memo that will really explain how we got to these numbers that are presented before you. Next slide, please. Some of the information that you see in the report may look a little familiar. Since the Corridor Performance Report published earlier this year demonstrated the program's success, especially on the I-66 corridor, we included some of the data from that report in the annual. We're restating and we're reaffirming exactly the messages that we want to share, and that is that we are moving more people in fewer vehicles, especially when you're comparing the information that we have available from 2019 and 2015. Next slide, please. We know it's not a coincidence that, Commuter Choice has funded 56 additional commuter buses on the I-66 corridor, and that there's been a 26% growth in commuter bus ridership since 2015. Of course, again, and I know you guys are probably tired of us saying that, but COVID-19 definitely impacted ridership in this area. And we did directly address that in the report, and we are continuing to monitor and watch this space. Next slide, please. We are really focused on providing memorable infographics that will help people visualize the types of projects that we have and the geographic reach that we are doing with the Commuter Choice program. Next slide, please. The map and this slide will, in the actual report, read as a 2-page spread so that it will be really easy for people to identify the kinds of things that we've been funding through Commuter Choice. Next slide, please. And finally, just a little bit of information about the companion website. It's not ready yet. We plan to launch it right before our deadline for the report, maybe a week before October 31st. And we hope that you guys will look at it and even use the search function and spread the message about all the work that we're all doing collectively for Commuter Choice. And that is it for me. Question?
Okay. I think this is back to me. Jay, thank you. That was a really enlightening presentation. We appreciate it. Questions for Jay about the annual report in particular? If there are none, I'm going to assume that was because the presentation covered every possible angle. And thank you, too, for introducing us to the website, which looks like a really helpful tool for communicating about how these toll revenues are improving transit options in the region. Thank you. Right. So I think then that takes us to 5C, right? And I think we might be inviting Ben Owen to give a presentation about the 66 corridor. Or I'm sorry, yeah. Is that right?
You are correct.
Yep.
Okay, let's do it. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you. One thing I just want to mention too is I was just listening and I was participating in PRTC's commission meeting, and they authorized us to transmit the report in relation to the 395-95 corridor.
That's great.
So
thank you.
That is done. Yeah. So jumping into the corridor specific discussion. So what we're going to be asking for in regard to 66 this evening. Since we talked last month, the Program Advisory Committee has endorsed the approach of splitting the programming for the Round 4 program into 2 pieces, given the revenue shortfalls and uncertainty brought about by COVID-19. So just summarizing what the action tonight will be in terms of the resolution, it would approve the first piece for submission to the CTB, allow us to enter into the related standard project agreements, and endorse coming back early next year for a supplemental programming action. that would strongly take proposed projects' technical scores into account based on availability of funding and public comment. But a bit of a recap here. Next slide, please. The revenue situation we're looking at is we have about $4 million available for programming now, compared with the $25 million that we had anticipated for the 2-year period when the application period closed in January. About half of this is money that's in the bank right now in the form of carryover, interest payments, and closeouts from projects completed under budget, and about half is new toll revenue that we expect to receive over the course of the year. So, excuse me, VDOT had estimated that for fiscal year 2021 as a whole, for the year, they'd collect about 40% of the revenue that they had budgeted prior to COVID. So we cut that anticipated payment in half in the interest of being conservative with our estimating. We do think it's very likely there will be additional revenue over the 2-year period as traffic rebounds. We hope to have a better idea in the spring when we expect to obtain revenue projections for fiscal year 2022 and final payment figures for 2021. And pieces of this are that we anticipate that the fiscal year 2022 toll revenue projections will exceed the very conservative 21 projections under which we're currently operating as more commuters return to their work sites. It's also possible that the 21 toll revenues will exceed the very conservative projections that we're assuming right now. We are also anticipating $5 million via the Commonwealth from the I-66 outside the Beltway Express Lanes concessionaire in early fiscal year 22. And it's very likely there will be additional projects completed under budget, so that money leftover funding would be available for reallocation as well. So in short, we believe we will have more money to work with. We want to be very careful now not to overextend and feel it would be speculative at best to try to identify an amount for 22 at this time. Next slide, please. The recommended initial program, which the PAC endorsed on September 17th, includes 6 projects, 3 renewals of existing commuter choice supported transit services. That includes 2 OmniRide commuter routes and 1 Loudoun County Express route between Purcellville and the Silver Line, and then 3 small capital projects, including a north entrance at the McLean Station to improve access to and from a large adjacent mixed-use development that's under construction. Also, expansion of Capital Bike Share to the city of Fairfax to create additional options for accessing the Vienna Metro Rail station, and designation of a peak period bus and high occupancy vehicle lane on Lee Highway near Roslyn to reduce delays for buses in particular. The initial program also includes our program administration and marketing expenses for the year, $300,000. All of this can be accommodated within the available funding with a bit of cushion left over should VDOT's payments come in more slowly than anticipated, or to apply to next spring's supplemental programming action. Next slide, please. We held a public comment period in September on the 6 projects under consideration for funding in the initial program. We promoted it via social media channels and through our applicants, and we held a virtual town hall meeting via YouTube on the 11th to describe the projects under consideration and explain the programming approach. This was available for later viewing as well. We received a grand total of 5 comment submissions. Those are, the full comments are included in tonight's packet. There was 1 specifically in support of the initial program, 2 offering general opinions on the types of projects that the program should support, and then a total of 10 different comments, discrete comments specific to projects. We did not specifically solicit comments on the projects that would be under consideration for supplemental programming next spring, so we'll hold a separate comment period on those prior to any commission action on them. Next slide, please. These are the 5 new transit services, new incentives, and larger capital proposals that would be the subject of supplemental programming next spring. So there are 2 new bus services, construction of a park and ride facility, and 2 commuter incentive projects on this list. We would not solicit any new proposals. We would strongly consider these projects' technical scores as part of the programming decision-making based upon the availability of funding and public comment. And we would also include our program administration and marketing expenses for fiscal year 22 with this supplemental programming as well. Next slide, please. So I'm happy to take any questions on I-66 prior to the actions.
Thank you so much, Ben. Let me invite questions and thoughts from members of the Program Advisory Committee who might have thoughts to share. Mr. Snyder, or any member of the commission who has questions about how this is unfolded, the recommendation to split the program, or the limited package that might be before us. Okay. Well, Mr. Snyder, as we start to consider the resolution itself, which is one of our action items, I think you had some proposed amendments to clarify. Would now be a time for you to introduce those?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks, Madam Chair. So people should focus on Resolution 2420. Is that right? I think that's right. And then focus on the second resolve clause. And I wondered if Kate Mattice could just read it. Just makes clearer what the presentation that you heard just said on the issue of we've got a reduced number of projects we're definitely going to be doing in phase one. Phase two, we're going to be using the same technical analysis, but we'll need to go through a public comment period. So I think that slight change in wording, which we're proposing to the resolution, makes that as clear as we can. Kate, do you want to read that language?
Absolutely. And so this is what I will say is the language that's proposed to be changed. So this is the second where the resolve clause saying, now therefore be it resolved that NVTC will select a commuter choice on the I-66 corridor supplemental round 4 FY 2022 program in the spring of 2021 based upon each project's application score, subject to availability of funding and public comment.
So, I honestly don't care if you want to keep it. Does anybody have any questions about the wording which we'll be proposing as part of Resolution 24? I don't have it.
So, Jeff, could I trouble you to mute? Thank you. Okay, great. Thank you so much, David. I think thanks for working on that to make sure that it more accurately reflects the intent, right? To be able to revisit some of these high quality and high scoring projects when the funds are available. Questions about the resolution or about the program of projects? Okay, well, I will once again credit that to the strong work of Dave's committee and certainly the presentation and the work that Ben, you've brought to the table as well as the team. So unless there are any objections, and I will pause for them, I'm going to suggest that we consider both the resolution on the annual report for the Commuter Choice Fiscal 20 program and the Round 4 program of projects. So any objection to considering those two items together? Hearing none, could I have a motion for those two items?
Madam Chair, I'd move approval of the submission of the NVTC Commuter Choice Program report and also approval of Resolution 2420 as amended.
I'll second that.
Thank you very much. All right, that's been moved and seconded. Let me pause for any further discussion. Hearing none, I will turn it to our secretary for a roll call vote on these two items.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Gary.
Aye.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. De Ferrenti.
Aye.
Mr. Evans. Ms. Filler Korn. Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik. Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Palchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Turner.
Aye.
And Mr. Stork.
Aye.
The motion passes. Turn it back to the chair.
Thank you very much. And a big thanks again to the staff involved as well as the Program Advisory Committee for your work there. Okay, our next item is a legislative update. It has certainly been an unusual special session, as if we have any delegates still left with us or senators could attest. And there's also, of course, action, although perhaps we'd wish for more, on the federal level in terms of legislative updates. So let me begin with Mr. Meyer, the chair of our Legislative and Policy Committee, to give a report, and then we're going to welcome our state liaison and get an update from Kate on the federal space as well. So first, Dave, over to you.
All right. Thank you, Chair Crystal. The Legislative and Policy Committee met on September 10.
Dad got like 200. His mom.
Hold on just a second.
She's sick.
Thank you, Jeff. We met, our committee met on September 10, and we developed really 6 state priorities for the upcoming General Assembly and 4 federal priorities. And when I'm finished, then Amy and the staff will go into some of this in more detail. For the state, basically, we had a transformative General Assembly this past January, and as everyone knows. So moving forward in January of 21, given the constraints that the whole Commonwealth is facing, we're going to focus on protecting existing programs and the revenue streams that fund transit. That's kind of stating the obvious. 2, continue urging state support for rail expansion, most especially in our region for Long Bridge. Also, we're going to continue to advocate for restoring the NVTA funding to take care of our organizational first cousin here in Northern Virginia. And we also want to ensure that our policies and priorities that acknowledge the direct link between transit and promoting equity and social justice. This issue was not in play in any significant way last year, but both the pandemic and all of the events since Memorial Day have reminded us that transit, especially for those who are on the lower economic stratas of our society and persons of color, greatly depend upon transit for their livelihood and for their neighborhoods. Also, we're going to seek flexibility for joint public bodies to meet remotely. We have there's been several opportunities for us to try and work collaboratively, and we need to be able to use that technology. And lastly, at the state level, we want to continue the recognition that NVTC should be the regional body to administer transit programs such as commuter choice. There's been, there's always this recurring chatter that perhaps we could merge organizations, and we really have a very unique and direct mission as an organization, and we want to affirm that. At the federal level, basically 4 priorities: continue funding support for the losses in transit due to the pandemic and the recovery, renewing the dedicated funding for WMATA, federal funding, and reauthorizing the FAST Act, and seeking federal support for major capital projects in the region like Long Bridge. Now, we're going to talk some more in a few minutes about the HEROES Act, which I think all of you are already aware of, because the most recent version that was introduced in the House does have some funding, $32 billion for transit. It's a bit nuanced in how it's proposed in terms of its categories, but it's there. Whether it ever sees the light of day is anybody's guess. But fortunately, through some outreach and persuasion, it's included in this proposal, which is a good thing. All of the jurisdictional members of NVTC, their legislative liaisons will be meeting on October 7 to gather more information from the staffers who are our point people for our legislative agenda. And our committee, the Legislative and Policy Committee, will, once the staffers have had that session on October 7, we will meet at 10 a.m. on October 15. With that, Chair Crystal, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your work. Let me welcome then Amy Perrin-Sebert, who is here to give us an update on what has been happening in Richmond, to be followed by Kate with a quick federal update. Amy, welcome.
Hi, good evening, Chair Crystal. Thank you for having me and the opportunity to give a brief update on where we are with special session. As you all know, we're entering sort of our 6th and 7th week of special session at this point. The budget was released. Both the House and Senate budgets were released on Friday last week, where we had the opportunity to see what was on both sides. We are extremely grateful both for Delegate Sullivan and Delegate Krizik for making sure that the language that we needed was included in the budget, allowing our joint entities to be able to have a remote virtual meeting. Because as a reminder for the committee, we're required by statute to have a joint meeting with NVTA, NVTC, CTB, and VRE. And unfortunately, the way the language was drafted during veto session, it would not let us be able to meet virtually. So that language is included in the House budget. We will be working to make sure it is included in the final conference report, which hopefully won't be too much of a problem. The only other change, we had the 2 items that provided flexibility to the CTB and DRPT and the secretary to be able to move around funds, when necessary during COVID to deal with the operations versus capital funds. And so there was some language included in the budget on the House side that just provides some General Assembly oversight. So it basically says that the General Assembly has to be informed when the CTB is what they're going to do when they make those changes, and they have to be informed within 5 days. They send a report to the legislature to let them know, and the CTB cannot vote on the same items in that same meeting. So they have to have a month in between where the General Assembly would have time to be able to comment on any of those flexibility changes that they're asking for. So I'm not sure if Delegate Krizik is still on the call. I know he had a caucus meeting, but if he has anything else to add, he was the one that helped craft that language. So happy to let him say something else. But other than that, we're working on, obviously, the conference report. The Senate voted on their budget tonight. Actually, they just adjourned, which is why Senator Bell and Senator Evan couldn't be with us. They were just working on the budget and finishing up some action. So most of the committee action is done. Most of the bills are now almost on the floor. So I think we're at this point just going to be working on conference reports for bills that need to be finished, as well as a conference report, obviously, for the budget for the next couple of weeks. So we'll see where we are with that. So that's all I have. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I think it might make sense to go ahead onto the federal legislative update and then do questions for both at the same time, if that's all right. But thank you for being our eyes and ears. And Kate, over to you then for the federal space.
So in real time, just tonight, the House did pass the HEROES Act, $2.2 trillion COVID-19 bill. And that does include $32 billion in funding for transit. That is the House. It is really uncertain and unclear if the Senate will take this up or when the Senate will take this up. But indeed, the House did pass that bill while we've been holding this meeting. The other thing that late last night, the government did they did go ahead and pass an 11-week extension to the appropriations, federal appropriations, which is going to allow PREA, that dedicated funding for WMATA, to continue through. But it also actually included a 1-year extension to the Federal Surface Transportation, known as the FAST Act. That is something that we have in our legislative agenda. So there is another year extension on that. And of course, it's really important for there to be action to reauthorize that program. That's all highway and transit programs in the country. And really, quite honestly, the biggest challenge facing that is finding the elements to pay for that. Traditionally, highways and transit have been paid for by a federal gas tax that hasn't been increased since 1993. So that's a really big deal. But at least we've got a year breather room for that to be moving forward. And that is what I have on the federal update. I do need to make a selfish plug for our joint legislative briefing on December 7th from 9 to 11. That's joint with with PRTC. It's going to be virtual. So stay tuned. We'll be sending some save the dates and firming up some exciting speakers for that morning virtual event in December. Thanks.
Thank you. Who doesn't want to be part of the historic first ever virtual joint legislative update, right? Okay. Okay, let me open the floor to commissioners for questions about either the state or the federal updates, or questions for Mr. Meyer and the legislative committee. All right. Well, I might chalk it up to the hour, but if questions occur to you, I know that we'll have Amy, Kate, and Dave and his committee at the ready. So thank you all. Okay, moving right along, we do have a presentation tonight from our Transit Resource Center. Let me welcome Kate to introduce the staff that have been hard at work on this analysis.
Fantastic. So indeed, in your materials is our both our quarterly transit ridership and metro parking, and our annual fiscal 2020 transit performance report. And a lot of our data stuff's behind the scenes. Dan Goldfarb and Dina Girma are heavily involved and really understanding this data. And so Dina's here tonight to provide a very brief highlight of our annual report, which is really the first look into the initial impact of ridership and service on COVID-19. But there's lots more in your documents, and there'll be lots more on the web. So I'm going to pass it over to Dina to give a couple highlights.
Thank you, Kate. I hope everybody can hear me just okay.
I can.
Great. All right. So thank you again, Kate, for the introduction. Good evening, commissioners. Tonight, I will be providing an overview of our annual Transit Resource Center performance report. The FY 2020 comprehensive report is included in your kit, but we also provide lots of resources as well as past quarterly and annual reports on the NVTC website under our Transit Resource Center. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first slide provides a snapshot of the impacts on ridership during the public health emergency. The initial dip in service for Metro that occurred in July is attributed to the impact of platform improvement closures. As those platform improvements were completed, ridership bounced back up in mid-August 2019. And then again, there is a dip around the holidays beginning in November, and then uptick in January as people left and came back from the year-end holidays. Then you'll notice in mid-February, we began to see the start of the impact on ridership and the continued reduction, with the steepest drop occurring in mid-March through the end of the fiscal year due to COVID-19. And then towards the end of the fiscal year, we started seeing a slight increase in ridership, with the expectation that this will be more apparent when we provide the FY 20 Q1 report. Next slide, please. The second slide provides an overview of the average daily transit boardings for Northern Virginia transit agencies, VRE, and Metro. Boardings on bus, commuter rail, and heavy rail was holding at a steady level since FY 2017. Factors to consider for low ridership in the fiscal years prior to the COVID health emergency is safe track and platform improvement work. Due to COVID-19, safety measures were implemented in March 2020 by the transit agencies that serve our region. These measures included rear door boarding, fare elimination, social distancing measures, and the closure of metro stations. Another factor to consider is that much of the region has been teleworking since about mid-March. Next slide, please. The third slide provides the summary points that are important factors to consider for FY 2020 transit ridership analysis for the region. Transit ridership was trending at a 5% increase in FY 20, which was slightly greater than in FY 19 when comparing July 2019 through March 2020 of FY 20 to that of FY 2019. Since the reduction in boardings that occurred in March 2020, there has been an uptick beginning in June as reopening of retail and businesses began to occur in Northern Virginia, as well as the lifting of more strict stay-at-home orders that were in place prior to June. Much of the region is still teleworking, but as businesses begin to allow employees to return back to places of employment, we are seeing an added incremental increase in ridership numbers across the region. Transit is an integral part of the transportation network for our region, and people depend on transit to get them around. For this reason, transit will remain important for the region as an alternative to SOV and as part of the vital multimodal options provided in our region. And as we continue to move into FY 21, we will continue to provide analysis on transit and ridership trends in our upcoming Transit Resource Center ridership quarterly reports, and are closely tracking the impacts of COVID-19 for FY 21, as well as the return of riders to our transit providers. So thank you, and I'll be more than happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Gina. And this is great work because I think it begins to answer some questions we've all been trying to get our heads around. The other question is, of course, the crystal ball question, but since nobody can answer that, we're really glad to have this analysis and data to help guide our thinking about the impacts to date. So questions about the this update and the transit ridership report.
Ms. Crystal?
Hi, Libby, how are you?
Yeah, I'm here. Hi. So could we go back to slide 56? I think it's the one just before this, actually. And what I noticed, and because I remember watching through, and I just wanted to compare them, because it seems to me WMATA ridership was down like 90%. Isn't that what Paul said at one point? Maybe not, but it looks like the overall transit is not, it's down by a third, which seems better than what we've been sort of generally hearing. So it's just, I guess, maybe sort of a positive message, and or am I missing something? But this doesn't seem quite as bad as I thought it might be. So.
This is Alan Fye. I can answer that question. I should provide a little bit of context to it. So basically what this is looking at on slide 56, average daily transit boarding. So that's what you see here. The reason it doesn't look quite as much of a drop off is the fact that this is an average over the entire year. But if you actually broke it out month by month, it shows see the drop off. But when you average it out over the year, it just doesn't quite look as bad because we had, basically about 8.5, 9 months of normal ridership, then we had the fall off. So a little bit of context there.
Okay, I knew I'd missed something. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. Yeah.
Sure.
That's a helpful distinction. Thank you. Any other questions?
Just a quick thanks for the presentation, Jay, and the answer, Alan. I wonder if it might be possible. I know when I took VRE, I got a real sense of where ridership was. If there are just numbers that we could follow up, maybe I can follow up with an email, numbers associated with slide 55, that would be great. Just so that, I can eyeball it and kind of see, but if you have numbers for those couple of months, that would be helpful. I might just email Ms. Mattice offline and follow up.
That would be great. We absolutely have those numbers. We're happy to share those with you.
Great. Thanks both.
Thanks. Other questions? Okay, seeing none. I know for that last point, our staff do remain at the ready to answer any further questions if ones occur to you after tonight's meeting, since the hour has gotten late. Do you want to welcome Mr. Dalton to give a VRE update? And I do believe we will have one action item following Mr. Dalton's report. But Rich, congratulations again. We're so glad to have your first presentation as the official VRE CEO, no longer acting. We're really looking forward to continuing to work with you. So turning it over to you, and then following, we'll go to Ms. Bennett Parker, who's going to have some more information about our one action item tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good evening, commissioners and others. Just wanted to give a brief but concise update. First, COVID. You do have a summary report in your package there, but just wanted to highlight that, for the past several months, we've spent, we've developed and implemented health and safety measures as part of our campaign to welcome the return of riders to VRE. And we just continue to monitor and enhance those measures. And in addition to the effects that they're having on VRE, but just monitoring our peers in the region and nationally for best practices and simply opportunities for improvements with those measures. We continue to push daily messaging through social media, direct communications with our riders, and other means to highlight the measures we have taken and provide our riders with information that they seek to bring them back to VRE. And then, just as a reminder, our passengers are still required to wear face coverings while on board VRE trains and at our stations, and we continue to see a near 100% daily compliance. And again, our train conductors do have face coverings available on board every VRE train in case our riders need one. I did also want to mention that during the week of September 21st, VRE participated in a national effort to promote rail safety. In addition to sharing safety messages via social media and other platforms, VRE arranged to have temporary solar-powered message boards installed at 7 grade crossings along both the Fredericksburg and the Manassas lines. The message boards displayed succinct safety messages throughout the week, and I just wanted to say that I appreciate there was obviously a lot of collaboration with our partners throughout our service area, and just wanted to thank them for helping us make this happen. Because as you know, safety has always been and remains VRE's priority. On the ridership side, VRE continues to we continue to operate at a reduced service level. For the month of September, our ridership steadily increased over 1,300 average daily riders. And again, in comparison to a period in May, where our average daily riders was about 400 people. We have, in the last week or so, we have seen our daily ridership exceed 1,500, nearing that 1,600 mark. So as I continue to say to others, ridership is returning one rider at a time. It's not in an accelerated pace, but we are seeing the trend in a positive way. On-time performance for the month of September was 95.5% system-wide. We continue to be excited about those performance metrics. VRE staff continues to work remotely. All of our business functions are fully operational as we continue to maintain a continuity of operations. And again, as we welcome back our riders, I just want to continue to thank our staff, our onboard train crews, and others for all their efforts toward planning and executing these additional health and safety measures. And most importantly, I want to just thank our loyal riders who have continued to endure this unprecedented time with us. And we continue to look forward to seeing many of you back, as we have seen many come back, especially most recently. So that is the end of my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dalton, and thank you in particular for the efforts that the team have made to welcome folks back safely. I think the social media campaign and other forms of communication with riders have been a real model. So thank you so much. And let me turn it back over to Ms. Bennett Parker, who is the Vice Chair of the VRE Operations Board, to talk to us a little bit about our action item today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our action item is to approve Resolution 2421 to refer the preliminary FY22 VRE operating and capital budget to the jurisdictions. The preliminary FY22 operating budget totals $91.9 million, which includes operations, maintenance, and existing debt service. The preliminary budget amount is nearly flat to the approved FY21 budget of $91.4 million, and VRE staff are continuing to review departmental budgets to identify further expense reductions. In light of the reduced ridership and ongoing economic challenges from COVID-19, the preliminary budget includes no changes to passenger fares and no increase to jurisdictional subsidy. Before the application of any available emergency funding, the preliminary operating budget has a net unfunded amount of $25.7 million. However, VRE's Federal CARES Act funding will be available to backfill lost passenger revenue and ensure that no additional jurisdictional contribution is required. The preliminary FY22 capital budget includes commitments of $101.8 million from federal, state, regional, and local funding sources towards the capital improvement program. It's undergoing substantial revisions as a result of the Transforming Rail in Virginia program being pursued by the Commonwealth, and the scopes, funding sources, and timelines of many projects are being modified in coordination with the Department of Rail and Public Transportation. VRE staff will submit a final FY22 VRE operating and capital budget at the December Operations Board meeting, and the commissioners will be asked for their final approval at our January 2021 meeting. Madam Chair, do you want me to go on to the information items or stop there?
I think we could go ahead and go on to the information items. It'll probably be helpful context, and then we can return to the budget vote. So please go ahead.
Sure, thank you. So a couple of things. First, we also approved at our meeting increasing the VRE CEO's delegated spending authority to award contracts up to $200,000 and procurement authorizations up to $1 million without requiring Operations Board approval. Periodically, the CEO delegation of authority limits have been raised. The VRE CEO will provide an expanded spending authority report to the operations board, incorporating a summary of all actions that would have previously gone to the operations board for approval. And the operations board had authority to approve this amendment based on the delegation of authority plan approved by the commissions in 2008. And one other additional item, I know that VRE would like to partner with elected officials and our member jurisdictions to share with a broader audience and our passengers and our constituents the steps we're taking to protect the health and safety of our riders during the current crisis. So if you have a newsletter or social media accounts and would be willing to share information, please let me know and I'd be happy to connect you to our public affairs administrator.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Okay, so we are going to return to that authorization of the referral of the preliminary budget. Again, sort of thinking about our own budget. If we're early, then VRE has to be even earlier. It's barely fiscal 21 and we're already thinking about 22, but this is really important. So we appreciate everyone's attention to it. And I think we should begin by getting a motion on the table. So if we have a motion to authorize the referral of the fiscal 22 preliminary budget.
So moved, Bennett Parker.
Do we have a second?
Second, DeFranti.
All right, thank you both. Any discussion, questions, concerns about this item and the preliminary budget from the VRE Operations Board? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to turn it to our secretary to do a roll call vote.
Chair Crystal.
Aye.
Mr. Aguirre.
Aye.
Mr. Elkhorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bell. Ms. Bennett Parker.
Aye.
Mr. Dave Ferrenti.
Aye.
Mr. Eben. Ms. Filler-Korn. Mr. Faust.
Aye.
Ms. Garvey.
Aye.
Mr. Krizik. Mr. McKay.
Aye.
Mr. Meyer.
Aye.
Ms. Pelchik.
Aye.
Mr. Reed. Mr. Smedberg.
Aye.
Mr. Snyder.
Aye.
Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Turner.
Aye.
Mr. Stork.
Aye.
The motion passes. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to our CEO, Mr. Dalton, and to Ms. Bennett Parker for that presentation. Okay, as we start to wrap up with our last couple of important reports, we do have now would usually be our DRPT or Public Rail and Public Transportation Rail report from Director Mitchell, who's not able to attend tonight's meeting. She does encourage us to take a look at her report. In particular, there is an item 9B about the Passenger Rail Authority and some appointments, but we are going to defer a major conversation of those appointments till next month when Director Mitchell is with us and can talk to us about the familiar names on that list, as well as other members, as that new body of the Passenger Rail Authority gets its work underway. So last but never least, we have our Executive Director report. So Kate, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As always, I do encourage you to take a look at the newsletter and your material. Lots of overview of things that have been happening over the last month or so. In particular, I actually do want to give a shout out to our communications and outreach manager, Matt Friedman. You don't often see him because he's actually managing all the YouTube stuff going on right now. But he's the one that's a big part of all of the newsletter, the Friday emails, and a lot of things that you see coming out. I do want to remind folks that we have a couple upcoming meetings and events. The Legislative and Policy Committee is going to be meeting again virtually on October 15th at 10 a.m. As we continue to work on the strategy and substance of our 2021 legislative and policy agenda. The WMATA committee will be meeting virtually on October 29th at 6 p.m. The focus of that meeting will be the annual report on the performance and condition of WMATA. And then as I've mentioned before, I'll mention again, we do have our annual joint NVTC and PRTC legislative briefing virtually on December 7th from 9 to 11 in the morning. I do want to draw attention, one thing that we did have included in the materials that will be coming back next month is a report on I-395. So we are planning towards next month for a call for projects. So I do encourage folks to look at the materials on 395 that are in your meeting materials. And then finally, just sort of an update, majority of our staff still continue to work from home. But starting next week, we do have some staff that will start coming in the offices on Tuesdays and Thursdays. We've done a whole bunch of protocols and safety. We had a lot of folks who were really happy to get back to a little bit of a routine. And so just a heads up, we will have some folks in the office Tuesdays and Thursdays while the rest of us are working from home. And also, we do have our financial reports that are included in your materials. Actually, you did get a good heads up last month where we are with the gas tax and things like that. But that's pretty much what we have.
All right, Kate, thanks. And welcome back, and please be safe to the staff who will be availing themselves of the reopened office. Okay, so let me once again open the floor for any questions of Kate, or frankly, any general members' time comments that commissioners may have before we adjourn. All right, hearing none, thank you in particular for the good conversation regarding WMATA this evening. I really appreciate everybody's participation in what I thought was a healthy discussion. Thank you all. This is going to go ahead and conclude our October meeting, and we look forward to seeing everyone on November 5th. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.